Hi, welcome back. So in the last video, we looked at our transversals that crossed two lines, and we looked at how everything related with each other. So I know my vertical angles are always congruent. My linear pairs, we said, were always supplementary. And then we said there was no angle relationship, like measurement relationship, between the corresponding, the alternate exterior, the alternate interior, or the same side interior angles. There was no relationship. When we looked at the measurements, they weren't congruent, they weren't supplementary, they weren't complementary. There was no relationship that we could find. Okay? So now we're going to say, well, what if these two lines, instead of just being two random lines that get crossed, what if those two lines are parallel? Notice here I've got them marked parallel. Does that affect these two that did have a relationship? Does it affect the four that did not have a relationship? Okay, so we're going to start first by looking at the vertical angles. We said last time that they were congruent. So if I look at my vertical angles, are they still congruent? So let's see. If I look here at A would be vertical to C. They're both 120, right? B would be vertical to D. They're both 60, right? Vertical angles, both 60, both 120. Both 80, both 100. Both 80, both 100. So my vertical angles, they are still always congruent. Which again, remember, just means they always have the same value. They always have the same measure, equal measurements. Congruent means equal measurements. Okay? All right, so then the next thing we looked at was my linear pairs. And we said they are supplementary. Let's see if they're still supplementary. Your linear pairs, remember, are two angles that are right next to each other. So these two angles, right? This one's 60, this one's 120. Yes, they're 180. 60, 120, 60, 120. My angles right next to each other are always 180. 180, 80 and 100, 180. Same thing down here. So my linear pairs are still always supplementary. Adding up to 180 degrees. Okay? So now let's look at corresponding angles. Remember, corresponding angles are angles that are in the same position. So they're both going to be on the same side of the transversal. Maybe they're both to the left of the transversal. Here I'm choosing to the left and below this parallel line. So when I come down to this intersection, I'm going to stay to the left and below the parallel line. So these two pink angles are corresponding. And notice they're both 60. If I look at the two above it, they're both 120. If I look on the right-hand side, the two above the line would both be 60. And below the lines would be 120 and 120. So here they're all congruent. But let's see if that's also true on my second example. 100 here matches with 100 here. 80 matches with 80. 80 matches with 80. 100 matches with 100. My corresponding angles are always congruent when I have parallel lines. Okay? Again, we know this only happens when I have parallel lines because back here we said with corresponding angles, there was no relationship. Okay? Let's look at our alternate exterior angles. So for my alternate exterior angles, that's going to be like this 60-degree angle here that I'm going to mark in purple. It's to the right of the transversal, and it's on the outside of the top line. So that means I need to be to the left of the transversal and below the bottom line so that I'm on the outside. So these two angles are alternate exterior, and they're both, oops, y'all couldn't see that. These two angles are both outside the lines, so they're exterior, and one's to the right of the transversal, one's to the left. So these are alternate exterior, and notice they're both 60. My other set of alternate exterior are both 120, so they're equal. Let's see, does that happen here? My 80 and my 80, alternate exterior, and my 100 and my 100, alternate exterior. So yes, my alternate exterior angles, when I have parallel lines, are always congruent. Okay, let's look at my alternate interior angles. For my alternate interior angles, I'm going to switch to this picture because this one I've kind of marked all up. My alternate interior angles, I have to be in between the two lines on different sides of the transversal. So maybe this one here below the transversal, and maybe this one here above the transversal. So my 80 and my 80, they're alternate and interior. Look at my other two, 100 and 100, my alternate interior. They're the same. Does that happen over here? 120 and 120? Yep, they're the same. 160 and 60? Yes, they're the same. So my alternate interior angles are always congruent. So if I was going to look at this pattern of these new angles and use inductive reasoning to figure out what's going to be true for my same side interior angles, my answer would probably be always congruent. But let's look and go see. So my same side interior angles mean they have to be on the same side of the transversal and in between the two lines. So maybe they're both on the right or they're both on the left. So this angle here is same side interior and this angle here is same side. And oh, they're not the same. Look, this one's 120 and this one's 60. They do add up to 180 though. If I look at the other side, 60 and 120, they also add up to 180. Does that happen over here? 180 adds up to 180. 80 and 100 adds up to 180. So my same side interior angles are not always congruent, but they are always supplementary. Leave it to one to be different, right? The way I like to remember that it's the one that's always supplementary, that it's the one that's different from the others, is remember sometimes this is also called same side consecutive interior. So this is the weird one that has two names, which means it's the weird one that thinks it gets to be different, right? So that's kind of how I remember the difference there, okay? So when we review, if I look at both of these together, my vertical angle, so here I've got lines that are not parallel, here I've got lines that are parallel that are all crossed by transversals. No matter what, my vertical angles are always congruent. My linear pairs are always supplementary. And then there's no relationship with the others if my lines are not parallel. But there is a relationship, congruent, 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 and supplementary, when my lines that are crossed are parallel. Okay? All right, so we're going to have one more video that's going to show you some examples of how we use this information. Okay? Thank you so much for watching.